Episode 12 opens with a white-fanged bullhead cresting a blackened hill, coming into view of a massive castle. The bullhead lands, and Emerald, Hazel, and Mercury all exit onto the castle's landing pad. As in the canon show, Tyrion welcomes them and questions where Cinder is. Mercury and Hazel are stoic, but Emerald looks away, and Tyrion picks up on this. He slinks over to her and comments, "Well, shall I announce our new maiden to our beloved Queen Salem?" Emerald winces, and Tyrion retracts, cartoonish surprise on his face. "Oh, am I mistaken? She did pass it on to you, didn't she?" His words are dripped in sarcasm, because, he's an asshole. Emerald draws her blades. "I will cut off more than just your tail." Tyrion walks through the blade calmly, cutting himself as he goes, saying, "You would spill blood on her hallowed ground? Not even Cinder would be so bold." Mercury calls him a freak and tells him to back off while Hazel steps in to pull Tyrion away, saying, "Stop antagonizing them. She's waiting." Tyrion perks, skipping in front of the group before saying, "Yes, of course, she's eager to see all of you. We'll have time to mourn dear Cinder later." Tyrion begins to laugh as he leads them eagerly up the stairs. We cut back in as Bumblebee drives past the camera, pulling the wagon through the melting snow of the forest. Yang is driving and Crow is perched backwards on the seat behind her, while the rest are sprawled around the wagon. We look at our heroes, all worn and ragged, practically collapsed inside the wagon, save for Maria, who is holding a book. She begins to explain out loud to our crew what happened at the estate. "The apathy. They're not strong or ferocious. They drain your will to live. Bartleby's estate was hemorrhaging money towards the end. He wanted to cut costs on huntsman protection, but in order to do that, he needed everyone calm. He managed to track one down and lead it back, sealing it behind a wall in his cellar." The camera pans over to Roman as she says the next part. "Apparently the trick worked, but apathy don't tend to travel alone. And where there's one, more will follow." Crow looks up and belatedly asks, "Can they change their appearance? Shapeshift like into a person?" Maria gives him her best side-eye and explains, "They can. An apathy that's fed too much can grow into a mimic. Much more dangerous, those. They can eat entire towns if no one catches them. You were lucky to escape." Roman just nods and pulls Neo in tighter, saying, "Yeah, lucky." Maria closes the book and puts it away, reiterating, "Incredibly lucky. Managed to save you folks and find my target. I was just supposed to find a place and report back, but we ended up taking out a whole chunk of the problem. You guys are in for a bit of a payday." Weiss raises a brow and says, "We're getting paid?" Maria nods. "Partially, yeah. Not a full job. We'll still need a listing for actual huntsmen to clear that place out completely, but you've saved them some effort." Blake rolls her eyes. "Great. That'll help us save the world." Yang groans and says back, "Blake, we are not going to talk about that now." Blake leans forward. "Why not? It's the literal end of the world." Roman glares at Blake and says, "Shut up, we're all too tired." Blake moves to retort, but Ruby perks up, saying, "Look, we're going to talk about it, but he's right, we're all exhausted. We can unpack everything with the rest of Ranger." Blake's ears droop and her face hardens at Ruby's words. Maria looks at the crew confused. "What are you all talking about?" Roman looks at Maria bitterly. "Grandma, we literally just said we don't want to talk about it." Crow looks at Roman. "Have a little more respect, she's a living legend." Maria waves it off. "Nah, no disrespect taken, Sonny. I'm old." It is at this point that the crew ride up on a hill and overlook Argus, sun shining high in the sky. The crew are all smiles seeing it, and Ruby gets a call from John. Ruby's grin grows even brighter. We hard cut to our crew reuniting with John, Nora, and Ren at the entrance to the city. Ruby and John are the first to meet, getting a big old hug between them. Ruby winces from her injuries and tells him to ease up. He does, pulling back, saying, "Ease up? You should be glad I'm not yelling at you." "Actually, I'm going to yell at you. What were you thinking?" John pulls Ruby in and gives her an anime noogie, while Nora in the background yells, "You tell her, John!" And the rest of the crew have their reunion. Weiss hugging Nora, and Ren hugs Blake and Yang. John stops bullying Ruby and looks her dead in the eye, saying, "Seriously though, what you did up there, that wasn't cool. It was the right call, but it wasn't cool." RWBY looks solemnly at John, sighing. No, I'm sorry. John smiles. You made it back. I guess that's all that matters. Nora bounces up behind RWBY and pulls her into a hug with an accompanying squeaky sound. Nora puts her down gently and says, We really did miss you. RWBY turns around and returns the hug, saying, I really missed you too. Their hug lasts a little while before Roman walks up behind Nora, saying, Hey, Red! Surprised, Nora spins on her heel and lands a punch square in Roman's gut, causing him to double over in pain. Nora gives a genuine, oops, covering her mouth with her hand. Sorry, force of habit. I'm glad you're okay too? Roman, in a breathless, raspy voice, says, No problem. While Roman is doubled over, Maria walks up to RWBY and holds up her scroll, asking RWBY to do the same. RWBY does, and after tapping the two together, Maria says, There! You and your team can pick up your reward at any huntsman board in the city. My word's good with them. RWBY thanks her and Maria waves it off, walking away from the group, clearly not intending to linger. RWBY gives a look of consternation before asking Maria to stop, and clarifying, You never did tell me who you were. That advice you gave. Maria pauses and looks back to RWBY. Is it that hard to figure out? Maria lifts her cane and points to RWBY's face. I used to have silver eyes. RWBY gives a long, hard blink and quickly becomes giddy. That's exactly what I need! You can teach me— Maria lifts a hand to cut RWBY off. No, don't get so giddy, kiddo. If you want to go down that path, I can't stop you, but I'll tell you, it's tough. Maria pulls back out her scroll, bopping it to RWBY's. Tell you what, there's my address. You and your team can come over and I'll give you some pointers. But only if you're really sure. RWBY frowns at it, but otherwise says, Thank you. Maria waves RWBY goodbye, walking away. Yeah, whatever. Yang rolls Bumblebee up behind the group, asking John if he knows a place where they can sell a tractor wagon. John looks at her confused when Tara and Saffron walk up carrying their son Adrian. Saffron says warmly, I'm pretty sure the garage we rented for your bike would be willing to take it off your hands. We can drop it off on the way home. John looks at the crew and introduces. Everyone, this is my sister Saffron, her wife Tara, and my nephew, Adrian. Saffron, Tara, Adrian? This is everyone. Cut to the crew, all tired, smelly, and disheveled, making for an interesting first impression. Insult to injury, a piece of Bumblebee creaks loudly before it falls off. Tara puts a hand in front of Saffron. Saffron, wait, look at these girls. The camera pans over to RWBY, Neo, Yang, and the still recovering Roman. What happened to you all? Is that a sprained ankle? Did you break your leg? RWBY, like a deer in headlights, shrinks under the increasingly intense gaze of Tara, saying meekly, I think it's just a sprain. I don't really know. Tara continues, more livid. Where's the brace? You didn't make a brace? You just wrapped it in bandages? She turns to John, baffled. John, you told us they were all trained in first aid. John rubs the back of his head and shrugs. I said they were trained. Tara grips her forehead. Saffron, I can't in good conscience bring these girls back to our home. I need to get them medical attention. Saffron stops her wife, saying, Honey, this is one of your days off, and Adrian wouldn't like being stuck in a hospital. I'll take them. This leads to a brief back and forth between the couple before Tara finally complies. RWBY sighs in defeat, not having enough energy to argue. She looks to Yang and Neo, then to Weiss and Blake, asking, Think you guys can handle our stuff? Weiss and Blake nod, exhausted. RWBY offers a smile. Rest up, you guys. You need it. Yang adds, Especially you, Weiss. You need a shower. Weiss goes red as RWBY and Yang laugh, heading towards the streetcar, with John carrying RWBY. Blake is next to Weiss, chuckling softly, and Weiss sharply says, Stop that! Crow walks up to John and RWBY and offers to take her, but RWBY can't quite look Crow in the eye as she says, No. John's got me. Crow recoils a bit, somewhat lost and looking around for something to latch onto. He looks to Yang's bike and says, I guess I'll just take care of Bumblebee then. John gives RWBY a worried look and she just quietly nudges him to keep moving. All said and done, Saffron, John, RWBY, Neo, Yang, and Roman all board one streetcar, while Tara, Ren, Nora, Weiss, Blake, and Crow make their way towards another. A special thanks goes out to all of my wonderful patrons for supporting the channel. If you like this content and want more of it, please consider supporting it. Also consider picking up my new action-adventure novel, The Artificer, which is now available for purchase on Amazon in digital and in print. With that all said, back to your regularly scheduled fixing. We cut to John and Saffron, watching as his friends are admitted to the emergency ward of a hospital, leaving the two of them alone in the lobby. John sits in one of the seats with a sigh, and Saffron remains standing, watching worriedly as Ruby's cape disappears around the corner. Idly, she says, "I'm glad your friends made it, but, they're in really rough shape." John sighs again and rubs his brow. "I wish I had a better grasp of my semblance. We could have skipped coming here. But it'll take a lot more than a train crash to kill my friends." Saffron looks down at him and grows concerned. Will it? Will it really? John is silent, finding a point on the floor far, far away from Saffron incredibly interesting. "John, you never finished school. None of you did." John counters, "We made it all the way here, didn't we?" Saffron shakes her head. "And how much farther will you get before something catches up with you? You've been really quiet about why you're trying to get the Atlas, but it can't be so important to keep you going like this." John just looks at her, resolute. "It's bigger than you can imagine, Saffron. We can't just abandon it. Besides, we were going to become huntsmen anyway. This is just par for the course." Saffron sits down next to him and rests a hand on his knee, saying, "There's more than just one way to be a huntsman. Not everyone needs to go on a grand quest, John." She leans in and her voice becomes soft and even more honest. "We need huntsmen here. With Atlas withdrawing and the disaster at Mistral, we're out on our own over here. You could do a lot more, and it doesn't have to take you halfway across the world." The camera focuses in on John's conflicted face, pulling in closer and closer before cutting away. We match cut to Emerald's concerned face and we pull out, revealing she's in Salem's throne room, her, Mercury, and Hazel kneeling in silence. We pan over to Salem, standing beside a window, looking out at the lands beyond and paying them no mind as her golden accents stand out among the shadows. At the door are Tyrion and Watts, both at ease and watching intently. She asks Hazel, calmly, "Explain, exactly, how you failed so spectacularly at Haven." Hazel speaks in return. "When the White Fang moved up their timeline, it threw everything off. There was no way we could have accounted for the Menagerie militia." Salem gives a sigh and asks, "Emerald, why did you all fail?" Emerald winces and sputters out, I don't know, ma'am." Again, Salem sighs. "Let me rephrase my question. Who is responsible for your abject failure?" The ground below the three begins to bubble with black smoke, something that does not go unnoticed by them. Emerald, panicked, is unable to speak. Hazel, seeing this, resigns himself to his fate and stands, declaring that he takes full responsibility for the failure. In an instant, Salem's hand curls, and several dark tendrils launch out of the shadows and wrap around him, dragging him to his knees. Emerald and Mercury jump away in terror while Watts is unamused and Tyrion is giddy at the events before him. Salem turns and begins to walk towards the group, arms behind her back. The arms begin to pull him forward across the floor as she approaches, meeting her halfway as she says in a low, measured tone, "But that wouldn't be fair. We all know who's truly to blame." Hazel tries to resist against the tendrils and sputters out, "Ma'am," before one of the tendrils wrap around his mouth, silencing him. Salem steps past him, approaching the now frozen in terror Emerald and Mercury. She pauses and simply says, "Emerald?" before facing the petrified girl. Pressing closer, Emerald screws her eyes shut until Salem is right above her. Almost immediately, Emerald cracks and chokes out, "Cinder! We failed because of Cinder!" After a beat, Salem rests a comforting arm on Emerald's shoulder, and the tendrils around Hazel release, letting him breathe. "That took strength," she coos, caressing Emerald's cheek. "It is important you take responsibility for your own failures and not those of others." Pulling away, she side-eyes Hazel as he stands. "Though you are not blameless, Hazel." He lowers his head and says, "Ma'am." Turning and walking back towards her throne, Salem continues, "I will hear and discipline Cinder accordingly when she returns." Watts, once relaxed, now looks up at her in surprise and maybe a little disbelief. "She's alive?" Watts quickly realizes he's spoken out of turn and covers his mouth with his fist, coughing and apologizing quietly before sliding back against the wall. Salem glares at Watts, but composes herself and says, "I've heard enough. You may leave." Then, more warmly, she says, "I'm sure all of you are very tired from your trip." Without hesitating, Emerald and Mercury turn and quickly exit the room, followed closely by Watts and Tyrion. Emerald slows on her way out and looks back as Hazel lingers and says, "Ma'am, there's one more thing." Wordlessly, she looks to him and waits for him to continue. "Ozpin has taken a new host. He was there, helping them." Salem doesn't seem to react to the news, but the camera zooms in on her fingers curling into her hand. Hazel idly notes the windows around the room cracking under some unseen pressure, and when he looks to Salem, she only says one word: "Leave." He heeds her order and turns back to the door, grabbing Emerald as he walks into the hall and the massive doors begin to close on them. We fade on the sound of cracking glass, and Emerald stares in horror as Salem's pristine form begins to emaciate. The doors close, and we cut away. We cut to the Anima Arc household, where Weiss is exiting a bathroom, fully clothed and still drying her hair with a towel. She exhales in bliss. A shower feels wonderful after a crash. Blake, who is playing with Adrian and Tara on the floor, raises a brow, while Tara adds, "The fact that you can say that with such certainty is alarming." Blake smirks and continues, "And here I thought RWBY was crater face." Weiss rolls her eyes and throws the towel at Blake, smacking her straight in the face. Tara sits straighter at RWBY's name and looks at the clock. "Ah, right. Saffron said they'd probably be on their way back by now. I gotta get started on dinner. Can you girls play with Adrian?" The two readily agree, and Tara rushes off to the kitchen. Weiss walks over and asks Adrian in a cutesy voice what he wants to play. He says, "Pilot," and Weiss freezes for a second while Blake looks for his toy. Finding a toy manta, Blake playfully flies it in front of him, pressing the button only for the sounds it makes to die out quickly. Adrian looks disappointed, about to cry, and Tara pops her head up from around the kitchen. "Are you playing with the manta? It's his favorite, but he keeps burning through those batteries. Try to distract him with something else." Adrian looks even sadder, and Weiss distracts him by picking him up and saying, "You know, piloting is a very dangerous career." While Weiss distracts him, Blake's ears twitch and she hurriedly fishes into her jacket's pocket. Pulling out the batteries from Brunswick, she plops them into the manta and presses the button. Adrian turns, hearing the sound, and begins to burble happily. Blake hands over the toy and Weiss sets him down so he can play with it. He begins to nom on one of the wings, prompting the two to coo over him dramatically. The front door opens and Saffron comes through, followed by the rest of their posse. Neo and Yang seem substantially better, and RWBY now has a proper splint on her leg while John helps her through the door, carrying her crutch. Roman follows behind them into the living room and collapses on one of the couches. Blake asks how the hospital trip went, and John replies, "Well, RWBY's got a small fracture, but thankfully it's not worse. Neo and Yang need warm fluids, and they all have checkups scheduled in a couple of days." While that's being said, Weiss is still playing with Adrian, who crashes the manta into the couch. Weiss frets over him, saying, No, that's bad, that's bad." John rests RWBY on the couch near Weiss, Neo sits on the floor near Roman, and Yang settles down next to Neo. John and Saffron go off to help Tara in the kitchen, and the crew in the living room just deflate, decompressing. RWBY asks where Ren and Nora are, and Weiss replies, "Last I checked, they were up getting the beds ready." RWBY nods and pauses before asking, "What about Crow?" Weiss shrugs and continues entertaining Adrian as she says, "He went out a while ago. Said he'll be back by dinner." RWBY rolls her eyes and says, "Of course he will," at that, and sinks deeper into the couch, closing her eyes. There is more quiet, and an unknown amount of time passes as we focus on RWBY resting before Saffron calls out that it's dinner time. RWBY opens her eyes, and we match cut to her sitting outside on a chair on a deck in roughly the same position, only to lean forward where she's set up a crude repair station for Crescent Rose on a porch table. She resumes work on the partially gutted weapon, covering herself in grease as she goes. She goes to reach for a tool but can't seem to find one, only for a hand to come into frame and offer her the missing device. She looks up to find Crow standing there, holding a kit in his other hand. He says awkwardly, "I figured a civil servant and a stay-at-home mom wouldn't have the tools you'd need." RWBY takes it begrudgingly and begins to rifle through the kit, finding what she needs and continuing to tinker without sparing Crow a second glance. He pulls up a chair beside her and watches. She sends him a single look, but continues to ignore him and work. The two exist there for a time, in almost uncomfortable silence. "You know, when your mom got angry, she'd do the same thing. Your dad could never stand the silent treatment. He'd always go off and do something somewhere else, let her cool off. She never did it to me unless I really messed up. RWBY slows for a moment but doesn't say anything and then resumes her regular speed quite quickly. Crow sighs and says, "I've always tried for you, RWBY. You and Yang. Me and Tai, we can't... What I'm trying to say is, I'm trying to do right by you. And sometimes I just can't. I wish I could, but I was never as good as your mother was." RWBY fully pauses at that, but keeps her head focused on Crescent Rose. Crow waits a beat before standing and saying, "Try not to stay up too late, kiddo. You deserve the rest." Crow heads to the door only to bump into John, who was on his way out. The two pass each other wordlessly, and John goes to talk with RWBY. From behind, we see RWBY very subtly rub at her cheeks with her wrist. John walks up beside her and asks, "Everything good?" RWBY glances at him and nods, sniffling. "Yeah, I'm fine." John leans on the table and says, "You know it's 1 a.m., right? Not many people doing maintenance at this hour." RWBY, slightly bitter-natured, turns to shoot him a knowing look. "Not many people up at this hour, period." John raises his hands in defeat. "Touché, touché." RWBY smiles, but it quickly fades. "There are things we need to discuss." John nods. "Yeah, we got some things to talk about, too." RWBY says, "We can do it in the morning." She sighs and looks up at the awning. "Man, things will be easier when we get to Atlas." John winces. "About that." Our last scene finds us outside of a mountainous airbase situated on an island just off the coast of Argus, nicknamed The Boot. The camera lies just outside the Boot's gate, facing inward where the assembled team is getting locked out. RWBY, in frustration, claws at the sky and screams. We cut to black and end the episode.